Welcome to Fatal Files, where we explore true crime and mystery cases. Please like and subscribe to ensure you'll never miss a weekly episode. Today we're looking at Australian true crime file case of Ivan Milat. Ivan Robert Marco Milat was one of 14 children whose father Stefan had emigrated from Yugoslavia to Australia and married a much younger local girl, Margaret. He was born on the 27th of December 1944 and was brought up in a rural community on the outskirts of Sydney, where such a large family was difficult for his parents to control. He loved hunting and guns, and he and his brothers would often find themselves in trouble with the local police. The Milats aren't an average Australian family. Clive Small, who was the head of the task force who captured Milat, noted in a 2015 documentary about Australian crime families. He said that the Milat's upbringing had recently been revealed by his nephew Alastair Chipsley. They had 500 acres down in Woomera Caves, and they used to go camping all the time and shooting. His nephew said, "In those days we were allowed guns. You didn't have gun licenses. Most people had guns in the old days, and you would have to give a few to your brothers. He had 10 brothers. You'd have a few guns between you. They used to get the black powder ones in kits and even make rifles and pistols themselves. We'd go hunting on the property and shooting targets. It was fun. Okay, we used to shoot the odd goat or two. There were lots of wild goats there. We had targets. We used to have barbecues and camp out on the river. And we used to think about how much fun we were having. We were a big family. We loved camping, drinking, cooking barbecues, and everybody was down there. That's what people did in the old days." And then some other family members claimed that Milat's father was violent, breaking one of the boys' arms. But his nephew, Shipsy, and others have vehemently denied this. Milat's brother Boris claimed that Ivan attacked a taxi driver when he was just 17. It was a crime for which someone else went to prison because that person believed that his own brother was responsible, but he took the blame. The taxi driver was shot in the back and was paralysed. Boris only made this claim in 2015. Again, other family members have said that it was a false accusation. Ivan Milat was certainly known to the police for at least one crime of violence. He was acquitted of rape of 2 female hitchhikers in 1971. After the prosecution failed to prove their case, the victims had claimed that he had driven them off the highway and used a knife against them during the attacks. He spent much of the 1960s in prison for theft, but there was no suspicion that he was involved in anything more serious, although now the police believed he was carrying out killings long before December 1989 and continue to regard him as a prime suspect in many cases. As recently as 2016, the coroner Peter Bain referenced Milat at the inquest for missing Corella teenagers Elaine Johnson and Kerry Ann Joel. Police inquiries show a number of young girls went missing in New South Wales in the late 70s and the early 80s. A number of persons of interest with violent histories were suspected by police who have been active during this time. Milat had always claimed he's innocent of the backpackers' murders, but the evidence certainly seemed to be stacking up against him. The bodies of 7 missing backpackers were found in Bengalo State Forest, 10 miles from the town of Berrima, close to Milat's home, and circumstantial evidence linked him to all 7, as well as the attempted robbery of another backpacker. It was this backpacker who was named Paul Onions. It was his testimony that combined with the abundance of evidence that convinced the jury to convict. Although Justice David Hunt noted it was clear from the evidence that 2 people had been involved because of the way the victims were killed, but it did not diminish Milat's part of the crimes. On the 19th of September 1992, 2 runners found a decaying body while they were running through the state forests in an area known as Executioner's Drop. They reported this to the police, who carried out a search, and the next day police constables Roger Goff and Suzanne Roberts found a second body around 30 metres away. There were originally some debate to the deceaseds' identities, as there were a number of reports of missing couples, but thanks to dental records, they soon revealed as a British pair. They were 21-year-old Caroline Clark and Joanne Walters, who was a year older. They were last seen at King's Cross area of Sydney in April that year, and they told friends they were hoping to get seasonal fruit picking jobs. Joanne had been gagged, then stabbed 21 times in the back and 14 times in the chest. Her spine had been severed, which paralysed her. Her body was placed under a rock below a camp on the Longacre Creek Fire Trail. Her killer had covered her with branches, and Caroline had been marched 10 metres away, blindfolded with her sweater, and then shot 10 times. She was shot in the head before being stabbed once in the chest. 10 Winchester Winner cartridges cases were found nearby. The girls' parents made a public appeal for information about the animals that had done this to their children. A forensic psychiatrist, Ron Milton, assessed the scene and felt that the perpetrators knew the area well, and perhaps they were hunters. The difference was the way the girls were killed that made him suspect there were 2 different killers. The area was searched for further bodies, but after a few days, nothing was found, and the investigators believed they had found everything in the forest. But they hadn't. It was over a year later, on the 5th of October 1993, that a local resident, Bruce Pryor, had by his own admission become obsessed with the case. So he used to search the part of the forest from where Caroline and Joanne's bodies were found. And there he found a human skull and a thigh bone. He called the police, and the skeletal remains of 2 more people were found, 25 metres apart. The female body was at the base of a tree, while the male beside a fallen log. Both have been discovered with leaf and stick debris Both had died from multiple stab wounds. They were quickly identified as Melbourne residents Deborah Everest and James Gibson. Both of them were 19 when they left Surrey Hills in Sydney to hitchhike to Confest, a music festival 300 miles away at Albury, on the morning of the 30th December 1989. The location of the bodies rather surprised police, as they had found a couple of items belonging to the pair by the side of the road at Galston Gorge, over 75 miles away from the forest in the northern suburbs of Sydney. A camera was located on the 31st of December 1989 and a backpack with James's name and address on its base. And then, on the 13th of March 1990, another backpack had been seen in the area. A further intensive search by over 300 officers had begun, and on the 1st of November 1993, Police Sergeant Jeff Tichter found the skull of the 21-year-old German tourist Simone Schimmel. She was the last seen on 20th January 1991. She was carrying a distinctive multicolored backpack and a blue day bag. She had left Guildford planning to get a bus to Liverpool and then hitchhike down to the Hume Highway to Melbourne. When her body was found, it was clear that she had died from numerous stab wounds to the upper torso, including 2 that severed her spine. There was an elasticized band around her skull and a gag of some sort in her mouth. There was some clothing at the scene that wasn't hers. It belonged to another missing person. And her friend Gabor, who had only come to Australia for a brief holiday after spending some time in Indonesia. As Senior Prosecutor Ian Lloyd explained at one of Milat's first hearings, that Hatchbat's head had been severed at the neck, apparently with one blow, and despite an excessive search of the head, had not been located. Hatchbat's body had no lower clothing. The bodies were in shallow graves about 25 meters apart. Gabor's mouth had been gagged with a cloth, and there were several bullets were found in his skull. Once again, it seemed that he had been used for target practice. Police searched the area, and about 160 meters away from Gabor's body, they found a treasure trove of evidence, which included Ely and Winchester Winnet cartridges cases, ammunition boxes, as well as a pair of pink jeans, a blue and yellow piece of telecom rope. Then nearer the body, items belonging to Gabor and Anya were found, as well as what the court described as a device suitable for restraining a person. I think it's fair to say that given what we now know about the 7 bodies that have been recovered, we don't know all of the causes of death. But they said, we know it is a serial killer. Inspector Clive Small announced that the police worked out a profile of the killer that had a huge amount of data which to deal with. According to the study by the Australian Institute of Criminology, at one stage during the backpacker murder investigations, it was estimated that the holdings of information increased around 7,000 to 10,000 pieces of information to around 1.5 million in just 12 weeks. A report in the Australian press described the operation as the biggest dragnet for serial killers in Australian history, reaching from Sydney to Southern Highlands as far as Greece, Italy, Germany, the Netherlands, and Britain. Up to 360 police at a single time have been employed in the search, and several $1 million spent. Police invented special computer software to try to cross-reference all of their evidence. Over 1 million telephone calls came in. Even though the link analysis technology was able to bring the suspect field down from 230 to 32, it really was getting almost impossible to see the wood from the trees. But then, a phone call. It came from the United Kingdom, or rather, until the note about a phone call from the United Kingdom finally surfaced among the thousands of pieces of paper relating to the case. Paul Onions had contacted South Wales Police on 13th of November 1993, but his call was not followed up until 5 months later. Back in 1989, 24-year-old Paul Onions had left his engineering job in Britain to backpack around Australia. The former sailor decided to hitchhike from Sydney to Victoria, looking for fruit-picking work after Christmas that year. He was aware of the risks, but he knew it would save him money. On the morning of the 25th of January 1990, he took a train to the Hume Highway and unsuccessfully tried to flag down passing motorists for about an hour. After taking a break at Longbardo's shopping centre in Cressella, he was approached by a smiling man with a moustache who asked if he needed a lift. The man introduced himself as Bill, and they got chatting as they headed down the road on the man's four-wheel drive. Bill didn't say much about his job, although he told Paul that his family came from Yugoslavia. But he established that Paul's plans in Australia were for about a half an hour into the journey. His attitude started to change. He was no longer friendly. He began expressing controversial opinions about police. He was like a Jekyll and Hyde character, Onions said. Then Bill stopped the vehicle close to the entrance of Bungalow State Forest, claiming that the radio reception was poor out on the highways, so he would sort some music out for them and listen to it on their journey. Bill got out and started rummaging under the driver's seat, claiming he was looking for some cassette tapes. A little uneasy, Paul Onions also got out and stretched his legs. Then he got back in when Paul did. However, Bill exited the vehicle again, and this time returned to his seat with a black revolver, screaming at Paul. "This is a robbery," he cried. And Paul tried to calm him down, but Bill reached under his seat and pulled out a bag of rope, fully intending to restrain the young Englishman. Fearing for his life, Paul ran. There were cars coming towards him, but no one would stop. From behind, Bill shouted, "Stop, or I'll shoot!" And Paul heard a gunshot. Bill caught up with him and pulled him to the ground. They wrestled for a moment before Paul managed to get up at this time, threw himself into the path of an oncoming car to make it stop, and as it screeched to a halt, I just jumped into the back seat. The woman driver, Joan Berry, did a U-turn and took Paul to Revel police station. Paul's rucksack containing a distinctive blue denim t-shirt was still on the back of Bill's car. Paul made his report to Constable Janet Nicholson, who made detailed notes. Most of his description would later prove to match Ivan Milat. Paul overestimated his attacker's height, but Milat was known as Bill at the time. He drove a Nissan four-wheel drive vehicle. He was a road worker. His father was from Yugoslavia. He was divorced, and despite denying it originally at the time, he did have a mustache. The offence was treated as an assault with a firearm, but no arrests were made. And then Paul went back to Sydney, where he was teased by a group of former British miners whom he had been drinking with, that they had been confident that he would get back from fruit picking within a week because it was hard work. But Paul explained that Milat tried to kill him, but his friends did not believe him. After he returned to the UK, Paul was haunted by memories of his close call with Bill, and when he saw the newspaper and television reports of the backpacker murders in 1993, he contacted the Australian High Commission in London. Eventually, the task force seeking the backpacker murders got in touch with him. Paul was shown a video of 13 still photos, including Milat's passport shot, and he chose Milat from his moustache to his identical to the face who approached me at the news agency, Paul testified. Joanne Berry independently got in touch with the task force and collaborated Paul's story. The evidence provided by Paul added to the information that the officers had gathered about the tight-knit family of hunters. Not long after the bodies were found in 1993, Alex Milat had come to the police with a story about seeing two girls being abducted some months earlier. He and a friend had been in the forest and seen a car with youths in it and a couple of women tied up in the back. But the story did not ring true. Why hadn't they said anything earlier? Why didn't they do anything to help? It had focused police attention even more upon the family. Investigators showed that Ivan and his brother Richard worked on road gangs along the highway. He had sold his Nissan four-wheel drive not long after the initial bodies were found in 1992, but he accidentally left the .22 caliber bullets under the front seat. The brothers' alibis for the time of the disappearance of the backpackers were checked, and only Ivan was unaccounted for on the day of each of the murders. Milat's earlier acquittal for armed robbery also weighed up against him when a hard copy of the charge was discovered by the task force. Alex Milat and his wife were questioned again. But then, almost casually, Ivan mentioned that he had given them a backpack which belonged to Shimon Schmiel. In the early morning of 22nd of May 1994, teams of police wearing bulletproof vests, armed with shotguns and machine guns, surrounded Milat's home. He had been under surveillance for some time, and police were aware that he was asleep at the property, but he also had access to his firearms. It took 2 phone calls and over 30 minutes before Milat surrendered to the police, and he was arrested for robbery and weapons offences. He appeared in court simply on those charges the next day, but didn't enter a plea. A week later, he was charged with 7 counts of murder. When Milat was arrested, police just didn't search his house. Over 300 officers checked out the properties of his brother Richard, Alex, Boris, Walter, and Bill at the same time. The evidence that incriminated Ivan was found in 3 places: at Ivan's own house, at his mother's house, and his brother's Walter's. In his own home, police found photo of Milat carrying Deborah Everett's sleeping bag, as well as the bag itself. They found Simone's sleeping bag cover and tent in a cupboard. They found a similar headband around the tent, similar to the one found near her body. They found her water bottle and pouch with her name still visible upon it. They found Indonesian money, believed to be from Gabor. They found parts of firearms and knives that were in hidden places, like in the cavity of walls and the roof. At his mother's home, police found Paul Onion's next t-shirt in a box in the garage, as well as a length of sash cord that matched the cord used on Gabor and Anya. Milat's girlfriend, Chalinda Hughes, who had no idea about Milat's murderous ways, had been given Caroline Clark's t-shirt. Caroline's camera was in the kitchen at Milat's home with a photo of Chalinda wearing the shirt. In total, there were over 300 pieces of evidence. Ballistic tests linked the cartridges found near Gabor's body with parts of the rifle discovered in the cavity walls. DNA testing on blood-stained piece of cord linked Milat to Caroline Clark. And then the trial began in March 1996. It lasted 3 whole months, with the prosecution relying on the discoveries in the house, as well as Milat's repair of his Nissan and the bullets that were discovered under the seat. The defense had to concede that there was no doubt at all, so whoever committed all 8 offences must be within the Milat family, or very close associates. They tried to shift the blame to other members of the family, but Milat himself made a poor witness, and on the 27th of July, 1996, the jury returned with 3 days' deliberation to find him guilty on all counts. He received 6 years for the attack on Paul and 7 consecutive life sentences for all the murders. Ivan Milat tried to break out of Maitland Jail in May 1997, but the attempt was foiled. Then Milat was transferred to a maximum security wing of Goulburn Prison. He appealed against his sentence on numerous occasions, even going as far as to cutting off his finger to get the attention for his case. However, despite a Facebook campaign and other social media presence by his family members, it seems highly unlikely that Ivan Milat will ever see the light of day again. Thank you for listening to Fatal Files. I am Paula Rose, your host. Please like and subscribe so you will not miss any updates. And we'll see you in the next case of the Fatal Files.